Let us begin this hour with the National Hockey League. By now, most of you have heard the Ottawa Senators released a statement last night that one of their players has tested positive for COVID-19. The rest of the team is both under quarantine and undergoing testing. That is all we know right now. Donald Fehr is the executive director of the National Hockey League Players Association. Mr. Fehr has been kind enough to join us on the line right now here on Tim and Sid. Donald, I hesitate asking everyone how they're doing because I have a feeling, but how are you doing?
Well, it's like, I suppose, trying to row a kayak in a hurricane. You never know what's going to happen. Things are coming at you from all sides, and you do the best you can. We're in a completely unprecedented situation, and it's obviously not just sports. In some respects, sports are a small part of it, and you've got to roll with it, do what you can, and hope you position yourself so that you come out well on the other side.
What does a day look like for Donald Fehr right now? What is your number one priority? What's your second priority? What are you doing?
Well, number one priority that I have, everybody in the office has, and everybody in the NHL has, is essentially to keep focused on the fact that the health and safety of players, their families, the fans, the general public, all of our staffs is the most important thing. The rest of it we'll worry with later when the opportunity is right, but that's the most important thing. So secondly, what I'm doing most of the time is talking on the phone and responding to emails and occasionally composing documents if we need to send something to players or I have to communicate with an outside expert or something like that. And it's incessant, but that's what you would expect in this kind of a situation.
Donald Fehr, Executive Director of the National Hockey League Players Association, joining us here on Tim and Sid. Donald, what is protocol for a moment like last night? When did you first catch wind that something was going on with a member of the Sens?
Well, what happens in these kinds of circumstances is that players understand when they have symptoms or there's an issue that the first thing they do is seek medical attention, and that's either with a doctor they know, which is unlikely in this situation, the doctor we have on staff, or the team doctor most of the time. You go see them, you get yourself evaluated, and then you follow their advice. And then during that process, it eventually filters out to the team and back to our office, and we contact everybody that's involved, make sure we understand the situation, how other people are going to be notified, and so on.
How many of your constituents have been tested, do you think? Or is that information you're willing to share?
I don't know. And in the ordinary course of events, I would not know absent a reason. My understanding, however, is this. The number of tests which are generally available is limited at the moment. And so you get a test if and when the doctors say that it's time for you to have one. I think that's
so from a situation. Sorry, forgive me, Donald. Go ahead.
I said I think that's the same thing, which is true for people everywhere. Players are no different. It's
an interesting moment because in terms of some of the NBA stories that we've seen, specifically the Brooklyn Nets yesterday, whose team underwent private testing, and a slew of players tested positive, including Kevin Durant, and they were asymptomatic. There has been some backlash on that in terms of whether or not private testing should be allowed in a story like this that is so serious, and there's so few tests across North America. Are you aware of teams private testing their own players? Is that anything you've heard of?
I don't know what private testing means. My understanding is that you follow the normal protocols. I would guess, but don't know, that in that situation, the level of exposure was such that the medical people or the public health people thought that it should be done. If it's something other than that, I'm not familiar with it. That's certainly the approach we would take.
Donald Fehr, Executive Director of the NHLPA, here on Tim and Sid. I was speaking to Arash Madani in the previous segment, Donald, and he brought up the point of, is Rudy Gobert a hero? What would the world be like as we sit here today if Rudy Gobert had not tested last week? How many more events would have gone ahead? How many more people would have congregated? As someone who runs an association with as many players as you do you think about last Wednesday night in those terms a week ago? I know it feels like 10 years ago. But do you, as someone in charge of so many people as you are, do you think about it in those terms?
Well, let me just correct you on one point. I'm not in charge of them. I work for them. So that you've got it a little bit turned around. But look, you sit there in circumstances like these, you have to be cognizant of the fact that there will be and probably should be greater press coverage and scrutiny and social media commentary on people who are celebrities or semi-celebrities, whether it's sports or entertainment or politics or whatever it is. And in circumstances like that, certainly there's possibilities from time to time to utilize a circumstance for purposes of education and so on. That said, it's the individual's choice when it comes to that, unless public health authorities believe that it shouldn't be. And you have to respect that also. So you do the best you can. It will not surprise you that various people with the union as well as with the team and the league may have had conversations, with the individual, but those conversations are confidential.
Donald Fehr here on Tim and Sid. That Wednesday night, Donald, a week ago, just can you give us some idea of, I mean, maybe frantic's not the word, but the level of conversation that was immediately happening between the Players Association, between yourself and Gary, and how deep into the night and the morning and the next day did that go? Just try and take us as much as you can in the room after Gobert tests positive. What was that like inside the league from your perspective?
It's actually pretty simple. You're dealing with the fact of that test and the rest of it, but to a much more profound extent, you are dealing with the growing level of change, concern, and orders being issued by various public health authorities, both those that are issued and the ones that you can reasonably expect to be coming. You're looking at the situation. Can we operate? More importantly, should we operate? And how do we go about it? And so you have initial conversations. It didn't take very long for people to understand that we needed to, and to agree that we needed to, at the very least, pause operations until we could figure out what's going on and see what the lay of the land was. And the rest of it is implementation. How do we do this? Who do we contact first? In what fashion do we tell them? How do we set up a way for players to ask questions and so on and so forth? I don't know, but I'm virtually certain that Gary was doing the same thing on his side with team operations. And it worked, I think, pretty well as you would expect. The decisions that had to be made were made, and then you follow through with all the details.
Donald Fehr, Executive Director of the NHLPA, kind enough to join us today here on Tim and Sid in these rather extraordinary times. Donald, I've been asking a lot of people just for a gut reaction on when hockey could be back. But the more I ask that question, it clearly dawns on me that there might not be a more unfair question right now, considering we're all kind of in the same boat. Should we even be speaking in those terms right now, in your opinion?
Not with any degree of specificity, no. Look, the first order of business is that the public health authorities in the U.S. and Canada will say when games on any basis, and if so, on what basis, could recommence. And once we look at that, then you can figure out what do we do, how fast do we try and do it, what's the best thing for the players and the owners, certainly, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, for the fans, and what does this mean for setting up the beginning of next season, which we all certainly hope and expect at this point would start in the ordinary course. I think it is fair to have sort of, just general conversation, if you want to, about if we could play on date X or day Y or day Z, what kinds of things might you consider? As long as everybody understands, just a bunch of people sitting around speculating when we do that. Because when we get some indication that the circumstances are changing, we will be able to say, all right, the facts are these, whatever they happen to be, and this is what we can do, and how do we go about doing that?
Donald Fehr, Executive Director of the PA here on Tim and Sid on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Donald, one more thing before we let you go, and we appreciate your time greatly. Aside from safety concerns or questions, what has been the biggest question from the PA internally directed towards you in your office? What's the most, other than the obvious, what's the most common concern from the players?
Well, it depends on when you ask. Initially, it was, are we going to have to suspend the season for a while? Secondly, if we do, what does that mean? Do I have to stay in the club's home city? Can I go back to my own home if it's in North America? Are there going to be border crossing issues if I go back to Europe, and so on? What if my wife or my kids or my parents live somewhere else? And then these circumstances change all the time as the public health situation changes. And it's logistical in that sense. You also will get some questions which indicate players are thinking, but which can't be answered. Like, what does this mean to the signing schedule for next year? Is there any way to predict what the financial implications are going to be, or anything like that? And we get those questions from players. We get them from, their agents and as well. And we have 5 former players on staff, plus a bunch of other people like me that are in contact with players all the time. And any question you can think of that might arise in these circumstances has very probably come up. My guess is, but it's only that over the next few days, people will settle in. All right, there's a new reality. And the thing we have to do now is exercise good hygiene and protect everybody and wait. And that's tough to do, but we all have to do it.
Here. I agree. It is tough to do, and we're all settling into this new thing that exists. And I have hope it's coming back. I think we all have hope. But I think to ask when is just not even a fair question at this point. Donald, I appreciate how busy you have been. I want to thank you for coming on. And hopefully at some point here we can talk about hard hockey-related issues in terms of on the ice. So stay safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.